The following is a Shaw TV Public Affairs presentation. Constituency Report is produced as a public service by members of the BC Legislature through the facilities of Shaw TV.
Hello and welcome to Constituency Report. I'm Tracy Grimsrud. Very pleased to welcome Ellis Ross to the studio today. He is MLA for Skeena. Welcome to the show, Ellis.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. And as one of our newer MLAs, I thought it might be nice to sort of take a look back at your life before politics. I understand you spent quite a bit of time in both the public and private sector.
Yeah, that's correct.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I was basically going after anything I could. And I did a few years as a laborer for Department of Fisheries and Oceans, counting fish, talking to fishermen. I was actually in the private sector with my brothers for a while, doing construction and hand logging and beachcombing. And I also ran a charter boat for a company in the town of Kitimat for about 10 or 11 years.
And what made you decide to run for office?
Well, somebody nominated me, and I had no idea what it meant. And previous to that, the leaders had been picking me to sit on certain committees for the community. So I just let my name stand to see what it was all about.
And how are you enjoying the work as MLA so far?
Oh, as MLA, well, that's a far cry from my first public office, which was on Kitimat Village Council. All I can say is that the further you go along and the further you go up into different organizations, the more learning there is. And this job by far is continuous learning almost every minute of every day.
I bet. And a lot of different things going on in the legislature in Victoria when the House is sitting versus all the things going on in the constituency as well.
There's a lot of different processes to understand and to balance, and at the same time trying to keep an idea of what you want to achieve.
Well, you're also very well known for your work as Chief of the Heisler First Nation. Will the work you did there, bringing First Nations to the table with industry and government, sort of carry over into your role as MLA?
You know, I didn't think it would, but it has. It's surprising to me, knowing where I came from, to realize that a lot of the fundamentals of First Nations issues aren't quite entirely understood, or the nature of First Nation communities and what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it. So it has carried over, and it's actually, as I'm learning from the legislature and my party, I really believe that they're also learning from me.
Absolutely. Well, heading into some of the issues, with regards to the implementation of the Niska Treaty, any thoughts you'd like to share on that?
You know, it was very brave and courageous of them to go down that road, to define their title the way they did. And it was still, it's still a historic agreement. But in terms of what they're trying to accomplish now, they still need an economic base to sustain themselves. And for that, they truly believe that they need a closer relationship with government to fully implement their treaty. But at the end of the day, though, well, what I'm seeing is that their goals, apart from the independence of the treaty, their number one goal seems to be economic development. And that I've seen that with the Tsawwassen Treaty as well.
You've been a strong supporter of an LNG industry here in BC. What would that mean to people in your area?
Well, we've already seen it, even with the preliminary work that was done in our area. It means jobs. It means contracts. It means opportunities for training. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the amount of wealth that was generated by our people and our communities was just unimaginable. I didn't think that was actually achievable when we're talking about average person wage earning, an average person like myself. So it's I can only imagine what it would mean if LNG did get off the ground and did achieve a final investment decision.
And when it comes to BC's competitiveness around LNG and other industries, are you concerned at all about some of the signals that the NDP seems to be sending to investors?
Well, you know, that's one of the reasons I resigned as chief councillor. I took a pay cut and I resigned from the chief council position to see if I could help the government get LNG off the ground. And one of the reasons I decided to join was because I thought that maybe I could lend my voice to competitiveness, not just with LNG, but all major investments coming to BC and Canada. And I really thought the government, you know, was serious about LNG, and that they were willing to go the extra mile to prove it, just like other jurisdictions around the world, like Louisiana and other jurisdictions in the United States. And I just don't see that. And if anything, what I'm seeing is that the government now is proposing even more cost and more hurdles, whereas our competitors, the United States, are proposing less cost and less hurdles to projects going through their country.
We have a look, or we have a photo rather, to take a look at. You're pictured here in your riding, chatting with some folks locally on the topic of investing. When you go out to inform people about some of the advantages of doing business in Northwest BC, what are you sharing with them?
You know, the geographics don't change. We're still closer to Japan than anybody else. And with countries like Japan and China, they have a choice of who to do business with country-wise. And they still come back to Canada and ask why we're not there, because they really like the stability of the Canadian government. And previously they liked our approach to economic development and investment coming into the region.
It doesn't seem to sound like the NDP has jobs top of mind. That word, jobs, seems to be lacking from quite a few of their initiatives. Are you concerned it might be left out of their poverty reduction plan that they're working on?
You know, where I came from, I've characterized as one big giant poverty plan that failed. As a chief councillor, one of the first plans we tried to address was the welfare list. And with 60 to 80% unemployment in our reserve, we came up with what I thought was a brilliant poverty plan. And it was based largely around seeing if we could increase the welfare payments and we could increase the number of people going after education. Well, that failed. Nobody really can see the benefit of a good education if there's no jobs in our area to achieve in the first place. Economic development, in my mind, it answers a lot of questions for British Columbia. And number one, it addresses jobs. And I do see that as being omitted in the NDP's plan.
And that's an issue you've spoken quite passionately about in the House, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's, you know, I learned poverty from the ground up, both personally as well as a leader. And it's, I've also seen the progression that a person takes when an opportunity is presented. They go from helplessness and poverty, and then gain an opportunity, and then they begin to grow from there. And no longer are they asking for more welfare or you know, resorting to other social issues like substance abuse. At that point, they start to talk about buying a truck or getting a mortgage or everything that everybody else takes for granted in our first world.
So with all that said, an opportunity like LNG, such a tremendous opportunity, would be a real game changer in your community, wouldn't it be?
It has been a game changer.
Yeah, already.
It you know, it's during the LNG mini boom that we experienced, not once did we talk about unemployment. Not once did we talk about welfare or unemployment insurance. And previous to that, that's all we used to talk about. In fact, there was one single mom that I met down in the mall there when the mall was bustling in Kitimat. And I asked her about how she was doing with all the work. And she told me that the only thing that she didn't like was the 6-day work week, because she was working 12 hours a day. And I was shocked. I said, wow, 6 days a week, 12-hour days. That's, man, I I did that when I was a young person, not when I was older. But then later on, she clarified. She said, I was working 7 days a week. Why did they take away that 1 day a week? And of course, I didn't know. I didn't understand any of it. But she was telling me about everything that she did with the money. She bought a van for the first time. She bought clothes. She went on a trip with her kids. And that was her only complaint, that she wasn't working longer as previous.
Yeah, so lots of opportunities there. And spin-offs as well. You think about hotels and the restaurants that workers and visitors will get to take part in thanks to those opportunities.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And you know, that's how Kitimat was created in the first place. Yeah. The aluminum industry came to town, and then they built a town, but then all these businesses popped up to support the industry.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what I envisioned that will happen when an LNG plant gets built in Kitimat. If not 2 plants, there will be a lot of services and a lot of opportunities for people to become entrepreneurs.
Definitely. Some of the themes we've discussed here sort of tie in with the notion of fiscal responsibility. Do you have any concerns around things like the NDP's September budget update or some of the other things they've been saying and doing of late?
Oh yes, definitely. You know, under the Indian Act, every band has to be fiscally responsible. And that basically means that every band has to come up with a zero balance at the end of the year. If they get a surplus, they're punished. If they get a deficit, they're punished. So most First Nation leaders, elected First Nation leaders, understand that you have to be fiscally responsible or there are consequences. And what I don't understand about this government in particular is that there doesn't seem to be any consequences. Balanced budgets, maybe they'll pull off one, but in terms of the revenues versus the payments going out the door, they don't seem to balance. And that's probably good for the short term, for maybe votes or maybe the next election. But my kids or my grandkids are probably going to have to deal with that if it's not addressed.
Absolutely. I understand you're also concerned with non-Canadian funds being used to stop resource development in BC. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, mostly everything that I've experienced in the last 12 or 13 years seems to originate from funding coming from the United States. And it always seems to be directed toward our natural resource industries. Or LNG, you know, the push against forestry, and which is, it's self-defeating for British Columbians to take this money and basically kill off our own economy, while at the same time, United States benefits from us, you know, taking ourselves out of the resource game. And it's a huge game. I mean, China and Japan taking LNG from the United States as opposed to Canada, that's less revenue for Canada and BC, and that's less jobs, that's less opportunity. And the less money we're talking about, you know, that means less services, unless you want to deficit finance that with basically telling your grandkids and great-grandkids that you'll pay for the services that we're going to borrow from today.
I know the issue around fish farms has been a big one of late, and what are you hearing from the NDP on this issue, and what impact could the removal of fish farms have for especially First Nations?
You know, I stood up for the fish farms on 2 fronts because I looked into fish farms a few years ago, and the NDP are talking about how it's, well, they've talked about a number of things, whether it be the scientific review or the laboratory, the BC laboratory, or First Nations interests, but one of them, the causes that they claimed that they were undertaking was wild salmon. And a few years ago, I looked into fish farms because of my concern for wild salmon. That's really all we live on. That's all my family lives on. So when I was looking at the declines of salmon in my territory, where there are no fish farms, I started to look at different reasons for why the salmon was declining. And if truly the issue is wild salmon, then it seems to me we're just picking out the easiest target that we can blame this issue on, when really, when you look at the scientific reports, including the Cohen Commission, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, like the warming of the oceans, overfishing. I'm guilty as charged here as well. Just taking way too much of the wild product. And even when you talk about the wild product, how much of that is wild in the first place? When you got Asian countries producing vast amounts of salmon in hatcheries, you got Alaska producing vast amounts of salmon in hatcheries and then releasing them into the Pacific Ocean so they can catch them. I mean, as Aboriginal fishermen, sport fishermen, every once in a while we'll catch a wild salmon that was actually originated in Alaska. That came from a hatchery.
Wow.
And I don't think that if we're going to have a discussion about wild salmon, I think we're really ignoring the larger issues that are affecting wild salmon. And I think that fish farms are just a short-term, they're not the solution to help save the salmon. I think there's larger issues that we should be looking at.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a short break here on Constituency Report. Grab a pen and paper. We'll put up contact information for MLA Ellis Ross. Back to chat much more with him right after this. Welcome back to Constituency Report as we continue our chat today with Ellis Ross, MLA for Skeena. Continuing with our discussion of some of the issues affecting the riding, you've raised the issue of the Terrace Hospital in the legislature. What's the situation there?
During the last campaign, Mike DeYoung came to Terrace to announce that the Terrace Hospital was in the budget. Mm-hmm. And anticipating that the Liberals would make up the next government and that we could get started on basically starting the process to start building the Terrace Hospital or rebuilding it. Right now, it's not in the current NDP budget. Mm. And I've tried to ask questions in terms of estimates, talking about where the Mills Memorial Hospital is in terms of priority of the NDP government, and I haven't gotten a real clear answer. I'll wait until the February budget, but my suspicion that it won't be in the February budget either, mm-hmm. and it won't be in the 3-year capital plan. So regardless of what people are reading in the paper, I'm trying to find out the facts on where it is in terms of priority of the NDP government.
Mm-hmm. We'll keep our eye on that one for sure. Another project in the riding I wanted to ask about is the sewage infrastructure replacement at Kitimat Terrace Airport. What's the status of that one right now?
Well, they were, the Airport Society does a great job in terms of servicing Kitimat, Terrace, Smithers, Prince Rupert. Terrace, being a regional town itself, services a large region and a lot of citizens of BC. But they had applied for funding from the federal government to upgrade their sewage, and basically they got denied. I was sending a letter to the Finance Committee in terms of the budgeting process for to kind of advocate for these types of projects, and got an answer that the projects in question should really advocate for themselves, mm-hmm. and that I could use question period to bring up an issue like the sewage replacement. But the Terrace Airport, you know, especially during the boom time that we had, mm-hmm. and especially when they're servicing other projects like Bruce Jack, or projects in Prince Rupert, right. They're seeing a lot of traffic, and all they need now is upgrading of their sewage. In fact, a lot of their fundraising, they do a lot of fundraising on their own to actually self-finance, and they just need the help on some of these larger projects to get their airport up to date.
There's a rather large debate underway in the legislature right now around Bill 6. This is the NDP's bill on proportional representation. Any thoughts you want to share on this one?
Oh, without a doubt. You know, it's I've described myself as an average, just an average BC citizen, and I had a really tough time understanding not only proportional representation itself, but the process leading up to how it would get enacted. And I really have, like most MLAs have, I really have a strong loyalty to my riding. I was born there. I want to stay there the rest of my life. I want my family to raise their family there as well. And for that, I really truly believe that the region needs representation that comes from the riding. The riding is already big enough. The riding comprises of Kitimat Village, the town of Kitimat, Terris, Kitsillas, Kitsim-Kalim, and Niska. Under proportional representation, that riding could be twice the size and represent more constituents, maybe even 3 times the size, and nobody's really confirmed that yet. And at the same time, the members of Skeena, the community of Skeena, elected me to represent them. And one form of proportional representation is the riding will still get to elect one of its own to represent them, but whoever the winning party is will select the other representative. And I didn't know that democracy could take this form. I mean, I made a comment about this in the House and asking, is this Russia? Because I wasn't aware that in a democracy, a government could choose the representative of a riding to represent a riding in Victoria, and that just does not make any sense to me.
Yeah, definitely lots of risks to consider with that system for sure. Switching gears a bit, we've got some photos of some of the great activities you've taken part in the riding. You recently visited Daybreak Farms. I understand they've been in business for 25 years. Tell us a bit about their operation.
That's right. You know, it's I'm a big fan of eggs, especially soft-boiled runny eggs.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't realize there was a farm in Terris that provided the whole region with eggs. Yeah. And it was a tremendous insight into how our farm operates, and 25 years. Yeah. It was an amazing accomplishment.
And speaking of great local businesses, you got to recognize McElhaney Consulting Services in Terris. 50 years in business for them.
50 years of engineering, and I knew a lot about them because as chief councillor, they did some work for our community in Kitimat Village, and they've done a lot of work in the riding as well as First Nations communities in our riding. It's a great organization, great people.
Sadly, we don't have a photo of this next one, but I wanted to ask you about the Rio Tinto Alcan smelter. A big success story, recently celebrating 1 year of operations after a big investment was made to modernize their plant. How are their operations running today?
Much cleaner than before.
Yeah.
Much cleaner. In fact, I was part of those negotiations even before they started. I was part of the council back in 2003. And so I saw those negotiations from my band in Rio Tinto progress to today, where they're celebrating 1 year of operations. And one of the biggest drivers for me to get it accomplished was they had committed to reducing their carcinogens that they were emitting. And it was they were going to clean up. They were going to put in a brand new smelter that would duplicate one back east. And they had committed to being one of the cleanest and greenest smelters in the world in terms of the carbon output.
Right.
And they accomplished it.
Great. Here's a great photo from the sod turning for a new First Nations all-inclusive daycare center in Terris. Tell us a bit about this project.
Yeah, so this was something I was invited to at almost like the last minute. But Progressive Ventures was there because they gained the contract. I know Progressive Ventures very well because of previous work that we did together, and they were in partnership with my band, but also the Kermode organization. It's nice to see an organization like that, a Native organization, building a service that doesn't just service the Aboriginal community; it serves the entire community. And I think that was worth celebrating that day.
Our next photo is also from Terris. Here you're with the Rotarian who helped get funds together for a new splash park. I'm guessing kids in the area are pretty excited about this.
That was a good project. In fact, I went through it that day because what I noticed about that was there was a lot of urban kids that probably couldn't make it out to the lake, you know, on a daily basis. And that location there, even when I was a kid, I used to go through that area a lot to the playground. Yeah. And it's just an all-around good story, good collaboration, good partnerships, and the kids were just going wild that day.
I bet. Well, speaking of splashing, here you are getting ready for a trip to the dunk tank in Kitimat. Who roped you into this one?
I don't remember, but that was such a horrible day. It was a great event, but the water was ice cold and it was shallow. So every time you hit the bottom, you bottomed out. Oh. And that was one cold day. But I think we raised a lot of money that day. I think it was for the SPCA.
Ah. How many times did you get dunked? Do you remember?
I think it was 3, but I challenged other leaders. First of all, I challenged people that if you want to dunk me, the balls would cost $20, not $5. And then I encouraged our chief counselor to get up there.
Ah, smart move.
Yes, because I didn't want to be the only one suffering that day.
Absolutely. Well, our last photo of the show features you and your wife Tracy at the Business Excellence Awards hosted by the Terrace and District Chamber of Commerce. I imagine that family support is so important to do this type of work, isn't it?
You know, she's the biggest reason that I've been able to sustain this line of work. This is a real tough job, being a leader, especially when you're confronted with decision making, because you're not going to please everybody. If you can pull off a decision that affects the majority of the people for the positive, then you're doing a pretty good job. And my wife and my family, even in my previous job, had to put up with all the comments on Facebook about me and put up with comments being said about me in social media and in public. And I asked them always to stay quiet, not to comment, not to get involved, because that's part of the job. But I can only imagine what it feels like for a family member to watch, you know, one of their own family members get criticized or attacked. So she's a big supporter of mine.
And I hear the two of you recently welcomed grandchild number 2. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I guess the role of grandpa is one of the more fun ones that you hold.
You know, I'm enjoying it much more than being a parent.
I bet. Wind them up and send them back.
Revenge. That's what I've heard other grandparents say it. Revenge on their kids that they had to raise.
Yeah. And before we close out the show, we want to remind folks, you've got great staff in your constituency office to help them with a wide range of issues.
Gina Verstega, she's my assistant Terris. She loves the job. She loves helping people. She comes in early, she leaves late. She even works on her lunch hour doing some other stuff. She's doing, and she's also setting up my office at Kitimat. And hopefully we're going to get that opened up pretty quick as well.
Great. So you'll have 2 offices to meet the needs of constituents.
That's right.
Absolutely. Well, that's wonderful. And it's been great to chat with you today, Ellis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Ellis Ross, he is MLA for Skeena. If you'd like more information about some of the topics and issues we've discussed with him on the show today, please visit his website, ellisrossmla.ca. You can find him on social media as well. Thanks so much for watching Constituency Report.